This video will show you how to configure cluster access for kubectl command line tool in Google Kubernetes Engine. If we have multiple clusters within a Google Cloud project, we need to choose which cluster kubectl should talk to. We've seen how to set a default cluster for kubectl command with gcloud container clusters get credentials command. Though, once we create a cluster with gcloud container clusters create command, that newly created cluster becomes the default one for the kubectl command. Therefore, it is not needed to make that cluster as a default explicitly. Additionally, we can run kubectl commands against other specific clusters using the cluster flag. Kubernetes uses a YAML file called Cubeconfig to store cluster authentication information for kubectl. That Cubeconfig file contains a list of contexts to which kubectl refers when running any commands. A context is a group of access parameters such as Kubernetes cluster, a user, and a namespace. The current context is the cluster that is currently the default for kubectl. All kubectl commands run against that cluster. By default, that kubeconfig file is saved in a file called config, which is located under .kube directory, which itself located in the home directory. When we create a cluster using gcloud container clusters create, an entry is automatically added to that kubeconfig file and the current context changes to that cluster. We can see the current context with kubectl config current context command. We can also run kubectl config view command to view the settings of all the clusters within kubeconfig file. The command returns a list of all clusters for which kubeconfig entries have been generated. If a GKE cluster is listed here, then we can run kubectl commands against it with our current environment. Otherwise, we need to generate a kubeconfig entry for that cluster with gcloud containers clusters get credentials command. Now, let me talk about authentication process for kubectl command. All GKE clusters are configured to accept Google Cloud user and service account identities by validating the credentials presented by kubectl and retrieving the email address associated with the user or service account identity. For example, when we use gcloud auth login command to authenticate yourself to Google Cloud Platform, our personal credentials are provided to kubectl. This allows the GKE cluster to authenticate us to execute kubectl command against the clusters. So that's all about configuring cluster access for kubectl command.